Good afternoon, Mr. Boochani. On behalf of the Cambridge Journal for Law, Politics, and Art, everyone here is so honored to speak and work with you about your life, your career, your resistance, and you are an icon in the fight against the systemic torture of the state and the right of everybody to be treated with respect. So I'm really delighted to be interviewing you
Yeah,
today.
thank you very much for having me. It's my pleasure. Nice to see you. It's great to do this work together.
Yeah. My first question was so I'm interviewing you from France after you've called New Zealand your home for the past 4 years. So what does a typical day look like for you now? In your work, in your life?
Yeah, actually, in New Zealand, I have just a simple life, which I'm happy about it. But I do some like local activities in the city, like with the like underground art community and literature community. So I do events, I show films to people and, this kind of work that I do. But in terms of my profession, my work,
Mhm.
I work on like writing film script
Right.
and also writing short stories. That's what I'm working on. But in terms of refugees, that's still I'm active, and most of my work actually is just doing events, but mostly out of New Zealand, not in New Zealand. I
Okay.
do in New Zealand as well, but most of my work is in Europe and in Australia. Last year, on May this year, actually, I visited Europe and I've been just traveling around Europe for like a book tour,
Mhm.
and I did more than 20 events across Europe,
Wow.
uh, Italy, uh, uh, Germany,
Mhm.
uh, you know Hungary,
Yeah.
Norway, Sweden, Amsterdam, and like Netherlands, Belgium.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I've been just traveling across Europe and I did many events, and now I came to Europe again. But this time was invited by Coimbra University,
Ah.
and I just to do, two events with PhD students.
Mhm.
So that is my work. And also I visited Australia last year, end of last year. And again, I traveled across the country, all of the cities, and I think we did like more than 20 events.
Oh my God.
And now I'm going back again. When I go back to New Zealand, I will fly tomorrow. After a week, I go because I am invited by Penn International to do some events in Australia. So that's most of my work,
Yeah.
just public speaking, and that is my work about refugees.
It sounds incredible. I was gonna ask, you answered this a bit by saying most of it's international, but sort of what your relationship with the New Zealand asylum system looks like now, and work with refugees and asylum seekers, as well as your personal relationship, sort of with the powers that be there.
Yeah, in terms of New Zealand, the problem with New Zealand is that New Zealand doesn't accept too many refugees. They just accept
Really?
1,500 refugees per year.
Wow.
So they accept these people through UNHCR.
Yeah.
and most of these refugees come from Asia countries. I mean, of course, refugees who are from Middle East or everywhere that they go to, like Indonesia, those countries,
Mhm.
and they UNHCR process them. They accept them,
Yeah.
like 1,500 people, and also, but New Zealand is quite interesting because they uh, they have a law about refugees who come by boat, which we know that the refugees don't come by boat to New Zealand, but they have a law for that. So
Huh.
now they have a proposal to, like, an amendment to that law, that if refugees come to New Zealand, it's possible they detain them for more than 30 days. So they not in the camp, they jail them.
Yeah.
So
Oh my
they
God.
have that system as well.
Mm.
So, but my biggest, if I criticize New Zealand, is just about the number of
Yeah.
people that New Zealand accept. I think they should take more.
Are you ever asked for your opinion, or ever are you ever consulted by the government of New Zealand, given that you you are probably New Zealand's most high profile refugee?
Not really, but I've met with many politicians and also organizations.
Okay.
But they about refugees who are in Port Moresby.
Yeah.
60 refugees are in Port Moresby yet in Papua New Guinea. So some of them
Still.
came to New Zealand. So New Zealand is going to accept them, some of them, through the agreement that New Zealand has with Australia to
Okay.
take 150 refugees from Australia. So some of those refugees came to New Zealand, and some organizations contacted me, just for what you mentioned, consultant. Yeah.
Right.
But from the government, not really. I mean, not officially.
That is a huge mischance on their part, in
Yeah.
my opinion. Um, so having having started in New Zealand, I know that you had written on sort of the experience of going through COVID, and the effect that COVID had on refugees and asylum seekers. And if my timeline is correct, the pandemic started right after you had reached New Zealand. What was this experience like for you? And
Yeah.
what are your takeaways?
Actually, I arrived before COVID.
Right before COVID.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I arrived before COVID. I think it was like, I don't know how long what, but it was a short time. So that was quite a surreal experience for me because I was in prison for such a long time.
Right.
Then I ended up in New Zealand and I was free for a while. Then I, you know, we went through lockdown,
Yeah.
but lockdown in New Zealand was not heavy compared to other countries. So in Christchurch, it took, I think, more than a month.
Mhm.
But that was a difficult experience, actually. But in Australia, it was interesting that the lockdown happened in Australia, and the government treated people in the hotels, or those places, when people from Australian people came from overseas back home.
Yeah.
They detained them in hotels, and I think they treated them in a way they treat refugees in detention,
Yeah.
because that is their mindset. That is how they used to. So I think that is quite interesting if some researchers do a research to compare the lockdown system in Australia compared to the refugees. And also, even some of those Australians who came overseas, they put them in Christmas Island, in the detention that
Wow.
was for refugees. So
How
that
full
was
circle.
really interesting. Yeah,
Yeah. And you know, I know that when you had been publicizing No Friend But the Mountains, you had talked quite a bit about the fact that the conditions that refugees and asylum seekers are held in that is the real Australia. This is something that, you know,
exactly.
is first experienced by asylum seekers when they're trying it out, and then the
Yeah.
rest of the population will feel that effect at some point. It does not stay inside closed borders.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why I think when I look at Australia during the lockdown, I think it's really important
Yeah.
that we see that the same uh, system, that was existing Manus in Nauru and also within the detention in Australia, that system actually this time target Australian citizens.
Yeah.
So that's why I say that when you establish like a detention industry like that,
Mhm.
definitely that impact on political culture in Australia. So you cannot do that in those islands
Yeah.
and say that, so this violence that we create, this tragedy that we create is just stay there and that doesn't impact on us, and I have a friend, Mansur Tayfuri.
Mhm.
Mansur Tayfuri is a Kurdish philosopher, and he introduced a concept, camp state.
Camp state.
That's really interesting. Camp state, that how these days we have governments who run the countries like running the camp, So
Wow.
he introduced the concept camp state, which is, yeah, I think is interesting.
And then my final question relating to your life now, is that when No Friend But the Mountains was first published, you were still writing from prison. The detention prison as opposed to the COVID prison. You continue today, in everything that you've told me, to be a prolific advocate and freedom fighter. How has the process of writing changed for you now that you're in such a different setting?
Yeah, actually, I wrote an article last week
Mhm.
exactly about this.
Really?
So, yeah, for a paper in Australia, they contacted me. So the writing for me, or how it changed, I think. So in Manus Island was different
Yeah.
because it was a different concept, context. And writing for me was not a place that I escaped to. It was like a tool, a strong like weapon to create change, to challenge that system. And I think that is really important because in this context, the context of refugees, we know that most of the time we have a process of victimization.
Yeah.
I mean, in media, by the humanitarian organization, human rights activists. But in Manus was different because it's not about victimization of refugees or victimization of myself. It is writing is a weapon to create change, to challenge that system, to fight. And I think that is really important that we recognize that, you know. So in Manus was like that for me, just writing as an act of resistance.
Mhm.
But when I came to New Zealand, so that was a big shift in my life,
Right.
because for 6 years I was in prison. I was fighting against that system, daily fight, and also I had to survive. So it was we were living in a prison camp. It was uh, like a struggling with a systematic torture, uh, stress, trauma, all of these. And when I arrived in New Zealand, that's finished. That means, you know, I was living in a peaceful city,
Right.
no tension, just that was a big shift.
Yeah.
So when that
Mhm.
happened, and of course, New Zealand was a very new place for me. The freedom itself was new, and that happened in just 24 hours, you know. So it took time for me to understand freedom, to understand my new place, new environment,
Yeah.
to establish a new life. So writing in that on that time was, of course, difficult,
Yeah.
you know, because I had to change my, you know, perspective, my mindset,
Right.
because I couldn't write like I was writing in Manus. So it was a big shift.
You're so
So it
used
took
to.
time. Yeah, it took time for me to just, I can't say it took years really that I get back to, you know, a normal life to write or like that. I'm not talking about trauma. I'm
Yeah.
talking about, uh, or this kind of thing. I'm talking about the environment. It changed. It was a big shift. So that's why, you know, it took time that I get back to my own writing. Yeah. So I had to find my new way.
Yeah. I mean, every day is just such a completely different experience than every
Yeah.
single day you had before. So it's especially if, you're used to producing and you're used
Yeah.
to having a weapon with your writing under these extreme conditions, then when
Yeah.
you take out all of the conditions, how
Yeah.
does the writing change, you know? It's really
Yeah.
fascinating. Um and now you've written an entirely new book. Well, like a compilation, but still produced an entirely new book. Create sort of a bundle, and I hope I'm describing this right, a bundle of the writings that you have created over the past couple of years, organized into different chapters. Sort which I find quite interesting also because you're well known for being a knowledge producer. For example, your spin on Elizabeth Schuller Fiorenza's concept of curiarchy.
Yeah.
And then I know that part one of Freedom Only Freedom is titled Creating a New Language in Collaboration. And you have created new genres, new language. I'm curious, with this book being a compilation of so many of your previous writings, how does the book sort of define the contours of the language you've created, or almost organize the knowledge you've produced?
The second book is really different compared to the first one in
Mhm.
terms of the language,
Right.
because the second one is a collection of my journalism works, but the journalism that is quite different to the current journalism, that we know,
Yeah.
is a journalism that, and also is the testimony as well. So someone who was working inside that system. But I think my journalism work in this book is just I try to link different people, marginalized people who get affected by that system in Manus Island, like LGBTQ people. Some of the articles are about them. Some of the articles are essays are about Manusian people. So the indigenous people in Manus Island, and I, write in the context of colonialism.
Right.
That's because the whole policy is established on colonialism mentality. And also some of the articles are about individuals, some refugees who died or killed, or, or their characters or stories are interesting. And some of the articles are about just politics, that how, we understand this exile policy in the context of politics in Australia, in relate to politics in Australia. For example, relate to the federal elections in Australia.
Right.
So these articles, and some of them are just about art, the role of art, music, and like cinema in this context. So I try to have like combine. It's like a combination of different aspects. So that's it's quite an interesting book in many ways.
I think so too.
But yeah. So that's the concept hierarchical system that you mentioned. Actually, that hierarchical system is Omid Tofighian he introduced. But yeah, because the word that I used in Farsi in my writing is sistema hakem.
Sistema
So
hakim.
I introduced the concept to analyze that system, but Omid wanted to translate it, and he didn't find a word in English to represent my word.
Yeah.
So he suggested that he use that concept, hierarchical system. So, but in the end, so that book actually came out last year, end of last year. And so it's translated and edited by Manus and Omid Tofighian, because they translated my works for many years. So they work on it, and they put all of these essays together, and even we invite some others who worked with me. They like Ben Doherty from Guardian, for example, that I used to work for him, with him for a long time, that he respond to my work, my article. So that became a book, which is, I think, is important book. It's hard to say that because it's my book, but
You can say that, I think.
yeah, definitely is an important book. I believe in that, and Australians should at least read this book.
definitely. I'm so curious since it was both published and not previously published work, how did you choose what to include? You've written so much.
Yeah, yeah. I actually, while I was in Manus, I published around 100 opinion pieces.
Mhm.
So, of course, if I put all of those articles together, it would become a book with like 600 pages, so that didn't work. And I think all of the articles that I wrote, they are not reporting, they are opinion pieces.
Mm,
So all of them, they could be included in this book. But of course, we didn't have a space for that. So
right.
what we did, we created some category. For example, some of the articles that are about like Manusian people, uh, they are in the same category. Some of them is about only politic refugees. So we created some category for that. So just to include some of them, but of course, all of them, yeah, we could include them, but just there was not space. So we did it in that way.
Wow. I and you traveled to Melbourne too, I know, to promote it. Can you tell
Yeah.
me about the emotions of that experience? How
Um,
did you find it? Were you recognized as such a famous author?
yeah, that was my travel to Australia was quite interesting because, of course, I was really busy when I arrived.
Mhm.
So just traveling each city, I was there just for a night or 2 nights. Then I had to travel. So we did like 20 events in just few weeks. And but the one of the most interesting events for me was that one that happened in the parliament. That I went there and I did a speech in the parliament to like some media and uh, politician. That was really interesting. Of course, it's interesting for someone who was in that island and now reached to that place. But for me, emotionally, was quite interesting because knew that this place that I'm visiting, all of this policy made here. So this place is a place that they make decision.
Yeah.
So this tragedy come out of this building, you know. So that was quite interesting, that I
So
had that
powerful.
feeling. I was aware of it and I did a speech.
What an absurd situation to find yourself in. I can't think of another word, just completely absurd to know that you've now walked in here and giving this speech, but you already know this place, you know it so well. And then
Yeah, I think for me, the performance was important, not what I was saying, because, we said a lot for many years and they didn't listen. And I was quite sure that even if I do the speech, that doesn't mean something change or
right,
really this politician listen. But the performance was important that we, I represent those people
right.
who've been dehumanized by that system for many years. So that was important, just appearance was important itself.
Definitely. And so between giving speeches, you write in prose, you write in poetry, you write journalism, you create films, like Choco Please Tell Us the Time. You comment live time through social media, you take photographs. Which avenue of communication do you feel like best conveys your thoughts and experiences?
For me,
There's
it's
so
just
many.
writing, actually. Yeah, I know, but, of course, we can use different medium platforms, languages. It can be cinema but for me, in end of the day, I'm just a writer.
Yeah.
So that's that is my main like language. But of course, I even now I work on script,
Yeah.
with friends, with colleagues. So, but generally for me, it's just writing in end of the day.
And you were always a writer. You were a journalist in Iran as well.
Yeah, I know myself as a writer for such a long time,
Right.
but it's quite interesting. When I visited Europe,
Uh-huh.
I met with Arash Kamali Sarvestani as well
Uh-huh.
for the first time.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah, that we made the film together. So when I visited Europe, we met each other for the first time. Then we went and we did a speech in the university. We did a speech in the Groningen University and also a university in Belgium. I forgot the name, Leuven
Yeah.
University. So we showed the film Choka a few times. That was quite a surreal experience as well to meet people like Arash for the first time. And we knew each other for such a long time.
This last question, or last two questions, had to do with your relationships with Nauru and Papua New Guinea today. So how often do you make contact with those that are still on these islands held in detention? Or are there still individuals being held there?
Yeah, so Nauru is closed, so no one is there now. So and Manus is closed as well, so no one is there. But 60 people remain in Port Moresby
Mm-hmm.
in Papua New Guinea, in the capital city. So I'm in touch with some of them, and I just talk with them. But you know, the problem with those people who remain is actually not only Australia,
Mm-hmm.
is Canada, America, and New Zealand as well, because those people have been waiting for such a long time to be transferred. They already recognized as a refugee. They already processed them. Some of them are waiting for just be transferred. They recognize as a refugee by United States. They accepted them, and they should just get a ticket for them and just
Right.
fly. And they've been there for such a long time.
They now have the
So
right
that's
to
quite,
asylum there, you know?
yeah. So people have been, they in many process, different process for many years, and it's enough. So they are waiting. So I don't know. Some of them, some that they've been transferred to New Zealand, but they just each month, each 2 months, they just transfer one person, sometimes two-person. It's like that. So, but Nauru is closed. So, but the problem with this system is that that policy still exists. So the policy, so if anyone come to Australia by boat, they banish them to those
After all this time
places.
and all this work done.
Yeah. So it's not a fundamental change.
Mm. Wow. The It's interesting to hear you talk about all of the other countries that are also complicit and in what is happening, if not active persecutors
Yeah,
as well. And you often spoke about the horrors that Australia inflicted specifically on Manusians,
yeah,
Nauruans, and sort of the poverty that is imposed upon the people who are living on these islands, where they then detain others. This power dynamic is really interesting because it seems to reflect a lot, for example, what England is doing with Rwanda currently. Um, how do you see Australia's legacy influencing other colonial systems today?
yeah. Actually, Australia obviously is using those countries as a cage, you know, as a place of torture, as a banishment land. So as a land to torture people. So in my perspective, it is a very classic version of colonialism
Right.
because they are obviously using those countries, you know. So that is but in terms of Papua New Guinea,
Hmm.
I think we have a kind of internal colonialism as well
Interesting.
because this money, yeah, because this money that Australia paid to those corrupt politicians,
Yeah.
they pay to politicians who are in Port Moresby,
Mm.
but actually they banish refugees to Manus Island. So even the people of Manus Island don't get the benefit of that, you know.
Well,
They take the money and they put it in their pocket in Port Moresby,
yeah.
you know. So, but of course, they damage those islands. At least they build prisons
Right.
and they cut the trees and they build a huge facility. That's what they did in Manus Island. They, I think the economy in those islands is like it lost balance because they spend so much money there for a short time, like
Mm.
5 years, 6 years. And many of the local people were working beside that or in that system as an officer, as I don't know, so and then suddenly they left.
Taking such a huge
And that,
part of the economy, what
yeah,
women.
definitely. Yeah. That damaged them. But the most interesting thing is that, people, the politicians, don't include them in the conversation.
Yeah.
The conversation, the discourse is just about refugees and Australia, but often they don't include local people in that conversation, but they are a part of it because this
Absolutely.
tragedy happen on their land.
Yeah. It's so important to highlight that they are there too.
Yeah,
Um, and that this also affects them.
yeah,
Uh, my final question for you today,
yeah.
um, is what role do you believe that refugee law has played in what you endured?
I think the what caused refugees. You know, this war that we witness in Ukraine, in Palestine, you know, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Middle East, in Kurdistan, you know, in my land, that, you know, Turkey, you know, always attack Kurdistan. So all of these things that cause, and in Africa, so that is a huge problem, you know, this war and this what caused refugees, and also climate change as well, and mismanagement of resources. So I think we should think about that. But in terms of the convention, you know, we've seen that a country like Australia that is committed to that convention.
Right.
Now in Australia, you know, if you go by boat and seek asylum, they said it's illegal, but actually it's not illegal.
Yeah.
You know, it's not illegal to seek asylum. So that is the, yeah, that is a huge problem right now with this all of the war and conflict that we have seen all around the world.